He was the man whose house birthed the Islam of Umar al-Faruq, a fierce warrior who charged first in every battle, and a soul so incredibly humble he actually tried to hide his own name from the list of those promised paradise. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the fascinating story of a man who literally shaped history, but spent his entire life running away from the spotlight. In a world where everybody seems to be chasing fame and power, the life of Saeed ibn Zayd is it's unbelievably refreshing. And this quote brilliantly captures the ultimate paradox of Saeed ibn Zayd. As we look at the historical sources, you kind of have to ask yourself, how could someone so unbelievably pivotal to major historical events remain so hidden? I mean, we're talking about an elite companion, a fearless warrior, and the brother-in-law to Umar ibn al-Khattab, yet he actively sought total obscurity. Part 1. Answer to a Father's Prayer. The Story of Zayd. To really understand Saeed, we actually need to look at his dad, Zayd ibn Amr. The texts tell us that long before the Prophet's mission even started, Zayd was out there acting as a total revolutionary. He walked the Arabian desert completely alone, desperately searching for the pure, monotheistic religion of Abraham. He publicly rejected the idol worship in Makkah. And get this, he would go out to the edges of the city to rescue infant daughters who were about to be buried alive. It was a tragic practice back then, but he would step in and offer to raise and provide for them himself. Tragically, Zayd passed away just before the Prophet Muhammad began receiving revelation. But in his final days, he made a powerful prayer. He prayed that if he was going to miss out on this divine truth, his son Saeed wouldn't. And Saeed quite literally became the living, breathing answer to his father's deepest prayer, becoming one of the very first people to accept Islam. Part 2. The Catalyst for Umar, Practicing Faith in the Shadows. So that early acceptance of Islam set the stage for arguably one of the most famous conversion stories in history. Saeed and his wife Fatimah, who, by the way, was Umar ibn al-Khattab's sister, were practicing their faith in absolute secrecy. Declaring your faith in Makkah back then meant severe persecution. So picture this, Saeed and Fatimah are huddled in their homes, secretly studying the Quran with a teacher named Habab. Suddenly, there's this terrifying, violent banging on their wooden door. It was Umar. And remember, at this point, Umar was a furious, imposing guy who had actually grabbed his sword to go kill the Prophet. But someone on the street diverted him and basically said, hey, you better go deal with your own family first. This right here is a massive turning point in history. Umar bursts in and Khabab scrambles to hide. Umar demands to know what they were reading, and a physical altercation breaks out. Saeed steps up and takes the absolute brunt of Umar's violent rage. But then Umar strikes his own sister, Fatimah. When he sees her bleed, something just snaps. His heart completely softens. The sources say he then asks to read the parchment they were hiding. Fatimah tells him to purify himself first, which he does, and then he reads the opening verses of Surah Taha. In that exact moment, right there in Saeed's living room, Umar's hostility just evaporated, and he embraced Islam. Part 3. The Unknown Soldier, Choosing Humility in Battle. Now, you'd think after serving as the catalyst for one of Islam's greatest figures, Saeed would be front and center, right? Nope. He constantly sought the shadows. He's described as this tall, dark, formidable guy, but his defining trait was just intense humility. For example, he actually missed the monumental Battle of Badr. Why? Well, the Prophet had sent him and Talha out as scouts to gather intel on a Syrian caravan led by Abu Sufyan. By the time they rushed back, the whole battle was over. But because his intention and dedication were so pure, the Prophet still gave him a share of the spoils, officially making him a veteran of Badr. And this is where it got super interesting, because there's this wild contrast in his personality. Let's look at the Battle of Yarmouk. The sources describe him literally jumping off his horse to his knees, piercing the enemy lines and fighting like a lion. He was a towering, fearless warrior. But at the same time, he famously said he'd rather his face be covered in dirt as some unknown, obscure soldier in the path of God than get any public fame or notoriety. He just wanted to do the heavy lifting where nobody was watching.
Part 4. Rejecting the Palace. Stepping down as the Governor of Damascus.
And that total rejection of fame didn't just stop at the battlefield. It went right into the highest halls of political power. As the Islamic Empire rapidly expanded, the Muslims conquered Damascus, and the great commander Abu Ubaidah appointed Saeed as the city's governor. So suddenly, this humble, shadow-seeking guy is living in the luxurious ancient palaces of Caesar. But he was absolutely disgusted by the prominence and comfort. He just felt so out of place.
After only a few months, he wrote a letter to Caliph Umar, his brother-in-law, and resigned. He explicitly said, "I do not want to sit in a palace while my brothers are struggling." He willingly walked away from running one of the greatest cities in the world just to go back to being a regular soldier. Amazing, right?
Part 5, the guarded prayer, facing a shocking test from a neighbor. Fast forward a bit, later in life, Saeed moved away from the center of power, to the quiet outskirts of Medina, to a place called Akik, just to protect his faith from all the political turmoil. But even in retirement, he faced a completely shocking test. A neighbor, Arwa bint Uwais, actually went to the governor, Marwan ibn al-Hakam, and falsely accused Saeed of stealing a portion of her property. Saeed was absolutely outraged. I mean, think about it. This is a guy who voluntarily gave up the governorship of Damascus. He told the court he had literally heard the prophet warn that anyone who unjustly takes this span of land will have 7 earths tied around their neck on the day of judgment. He looked at them and asked, "Do you really think I would steal someone's land after hearing that?" He was just profoundly frustrated by this blatant slander, so he surrendered the disputed land to her. But then he raised his hands and made this chilling, incredibly direct prayer to Allah against her deception. With absolute conviction, he prayed, "O Allah, if she is a liar, make her blind and make her home her grave." And wow, the historical texts say the result was absolute and immediate. Soon after, a massive flood hit the valley, unearthing the original property lines and proving Said was 100% innocent. And within a month, that woman lost her sight. Then, while she was walking on the exact property she had lied to claim, she literally fell down a well and died. It became this famous cautionary tale in Medina. That's exactly why you never ever mess with someone whose prayers have a direct, guarded line to God.
Part 6, the hidden 10th name, narrating the Ashra Mubashara.
So all of this lifelong humility really culminated in how Saeed spoke about his own ultimate destination. Since he outlived a lot of his peers, people would constantly ask him to narrate the famous hadith of the Ashara Mubashara. The 10 companions explicitly promised paradise by the Prophet in a single gathering. So he'd list them out: Abu Bakr, Omar, Uthman, Ali, Talha, Az-Zubair, Sa'd, Abdurrahman, and Abu Ubaidah. He'd list these 9 absolute giants of history, and then he would just stop talking, completely silent.
Imagine being in that crowd. The listeners would be on the edge of their seats. They would literally have to beg him, pleading by God, to just reveal the final person on the list. But it was a name he so desperately wanted to leave out, just out of sheer, overwhelming modesty.
Eventually, he'd quietly admit that it was him. He was the 10th. Saeed ibn Zayd passed away peacefully in his 70s, and the sources note this incredibly beautiful, poetic end to his life. He prayed Fajr, went home, laid down, and passed away uttering the Shahada. It's even recorded that before his body was washed for burial, it naturally gave off this beautiful scent of musk. He was a man who achieved the absolute pinnacle of success in his faith entirely by hiding from the world.
Which brings us to the core takeaway of this whole explainer. Saeed ibn Zayd's legacy leaves us with a really profound question to chew on. In an age where we document literally everything for public validation, are we exhausting ourselves for the loud, temporary applause of the world? Or are we striving to build a silent pillar of faith, doing that quiet, unglamorous work that echoes into eternity? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.